Welcome to your April STEP Talking Circle. Thank you all for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get disclaimed. This presentation was produced under U.S. Department of Education contract number GS00F115CA with Synergy Enterprises, Inc. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education. No official endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education of any product, commodity, service, or enterprise mentioned herein is intended or should be inferred. All right. So today in our talking circle, we're going to discuss a couple of things. We're going to do some program updates. We had a couple of questions in regard to this. We're also going to discuss teacher recruitment and retention. That was one of the topics that was brought up in March that we wanted to talk a bit more about, as well as professional development. And then also some updates on our upcoming events, because there are many. So you know your program officer, Shala Ortega, and she was able to hop in, even though I know they're busy with training over at the department right now. So as we get started today, I want to do a little bit of just kind of updating, and you're welcome to unmute or pop it in the chat box, whatever is really easier for you. But thinking about your programs or the schools that you work with, the programs that you work with, how are they currently conducting their programming or their school? Are they fully in person? Are they hybrid? Or are they fully online right now? And I know that is an ever-changing target. Oh. Like I said, you can unmute and share. You can chat.
This is Carl. Right now, we're just having meetings kind of by Zoom as far as, we're not doing a program as of yet. We're doing a lot of parent engagement, community engagement, a couple meetings a week. And then just Esther and I are meeting to go over those notes and review the input for the charter school application. But I'd say we're doing about 90% of it by Zoom. We had a face-to-face meeting at a school construction meeting. That was last week, and there was 6 or 7 of us in the room trying to stay socially distant and wearing our masks.
Yeah.
I think majority of people that have, in Alaska, if we want to have the vaccine, then we've had it. So, but even so, even being fully vaccinated, we still are being careful because there are people that are getting it, and we don't want to also be spreading it. So,
yeah.
We are doing some face-to-face events, but it's relatively few.
Yeah. Well, and Carl, as you head into the summer and next school year, are you anticipating that staying about the same, or do you think by next fall there may be, are you anticipating a bit more in person?
Oh, I would hope that we would be in person at least, July, August, but so much depends on the number of cases and the spread and kind of how the vaccine's impacting that, because there isn't enough information just yet to make that decision. But I know the school districts in the state have pretty much gone back to full-time in-person learning. Not all of them have. There's a few in rural Alaska that have just the elementary students, and they're doing every other day, small groups and that sort of thing. There's some of that going on, but we're doing some things in the tribal education department that is including students on weekend trips and evening and after school activities, and they're keeping those numbers fairly low.
Yeah.
But they're in person.
Okay. Great. Thank you for sharing. How about others? Where are y'all at currently with this?
This is Laura Rebels, and for us, all of our partnership meetings and meetings with the school district administrators, principals, etc., are all done via Zoom. We're still not allowed to travel to our community, so we're on Zoom almost every single day with our partners. And as far as I know, most of our schools that we serve have returned to some form of in-person.
Okay.
And as far as I know, we are not going to be able to travel. Right now, we have a deadline for September, because our organization is waiting to see where these new variants are going before they start allowing us to go back out into the communities.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for sharing.
This is Allison from the Blue Lake Rancheria.
Hi.
Currently, our partners are doing a mixture of hybrid and in person. And I don't think we have a school that is completely virtual still. There's some form of hybrid or in-person kind of thing going on there. The Blue Lake Rancheria does have an in-person program for those students that can't make the hybrid model work, because they do this A/B scheduling, and we have most of our kids are like, we have a 5-year-old and we have 2 7-year-olds, and they can't be left home alone while their parents at work, obviously. So we're operating that. Meeting with our partners, and Lisa can attest to this because she's been in the majority of those meetings, has all been virtual. And that is because the majority of our partners have policies stating that they can't have in-person meetings until we reach a certain tier level or something like that. So Lisa, you could probably comment more about how that's going.
Sure, I can. Thank you so much. Sorry about my tardiness, connectivity issues. Yeah. So, yeah, definitely virtual, and, different schools have, whether it's hybrid, but, we're keeping the protocols in place. Absolutely. That's a huge priority. Sometimes in the past couple months, the tiers have changed, but we're taking more of a side of caution than anything else.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so it sounds like there's a good bit of similarity so far. Any of the others?
Yeah, hello. This is Cameron Greendeer from the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. Yeah, this current program right now, a lot of it is done via Zoom. A lot of our meetings, meeting with a lot of the school staff, trying to set up programming for next year. We got our foot in the door this year, but it's getting close to the end of the year, so we're crossing our fingers that we can still do some curriculum building for the teachers, but it'll probably look like more like next year. COVID-19, a lot of us are back fully in school. I think they do have the choice of the hybrid, but most of them are back in school. And as far as our summer programming goes, we did have an idea for professional development for our local teachers on the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. So we're talking about PDPs, professional development points for the educators if they showed up. And it would take them on a history and of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, and also current tribal structure, to get everyone more familiar with our students and where they come from. As far as next school year, we're crossing our fingers we can get some of the curriculum development for, specifically, I've had ideas for November Native American Heritage Month for us to provide curriculum development for educators during that time. So that'd be a great time to celebrate some of our students, and hopefully create some of the create better self-esteem for our students, and who they are and where they come from. Thank you.
Great. All right, well, thank you everybody for sharing. We were just trying to kind of keep updated, because it is something that's just ever changing with everybody, and trying to kind of keep an idea of what's going on with all that.
Sarah, can you hear me?
Yes, Shala, are you able to hear us?
I can hear you, but I couldn't log into Zoom, so I'm just listening, just to let you know.
Perfect. I'm sorry it wasn't working with the link, but yeah, feel free to hop in. I know you can't quite see everything, but yeah, you can join in whenever.
Okay, I'm gonna put myself on mute
Okay.
and just listen. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, sometimes Zoom's a little persnickety. All right. The other thing we wanted to touch base on, just following up from last month. Last month we had talked a good bit about the project planner. So I did want to just make sure if anybody had any questions, if they'd had an opportunity to try it out and had any suggestions, questions, anything, we have a little time for that here as well.
I apologize. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Did you send that pre-populated to each of us, Karen?
Yes.
Okay, I must have it somewhere. It's just been a whirlwind, so I'll dig.
Well, I understand. Yeah, like we were kind of discussing in the pre-show time. Yeah, it's just a whirlwind of things right now. I can pop it to the top of your email box.
Okay, I appreciate that.
No problem.
for the
Yeah, I'm
start.
making a note. So as soon as the session's over, I'll pop it up the priority list for you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. Did anybody have any other questions or comments on that one? Okay. Well, then we're going to hop into our main discussion. So we talked last month about some different topics that were of particular interest to the group and that we wanted to discuss in future sessions. And one of the most popular was about teacher recruitment and retention. So to start out with, we wanted to just kind of discuss what are the biggest recruitment challenges that you're trying to overcome right now? And you're welcome to unmute and share any recruiting challenges you have. Pop those in the chat box.
I think for some of our smaller communities is finding anybody who wants to move to a small rural community.
Yeah. Okay. Does anybody else have similar challenges around attracting candidates who are willing to move to your area? I know many of you are in rural communities.
Lake Rancheria has experienced that, and that's why we had to relocate people to our area. So if I can say it's also a large cost is relocation of people.
Mhm.
It's not one of our priorities in our grant application, but I do have a lot of experience with teacher recruitment and retention in Alaska, and even the larger urban districts are starting to struggle. But I mean, some of the things are things that districts can't control. One is the state retirement system for teachers. It's been really kind of cut off at the knees, and it's gone from pretty good, retirement system to one of the worst in the country. Housing in rural communities is sometimes what people would consider substandard, or if it's standard, it's expensive. But there are districts that are taking some of the federal money that they're getting and subsidizing the housing, so that teachers that do come in can save a lot in housing. I mean, your whole family $400 or $500 a month is what they're paying in
Yeah.
some of the smaller districts. But yeah, housing is a big challenge, and making it affordable. And then, we get in rural Alaska, we get all kinds of teachers that come up, and we get the ones that are fresh out of college that want to have that Alaska experience. And after 2-3 years, and the social life isn't what they want, they tend to move on. And then we get the other end of the spectrum, which is folks that have retired from teaching in lower 48 states, and they'll come up and work for a few years, and then they want to be by their grandbabies. So we have that kind of turnover where it's a third of the teachers every year. And so over a 3-year period, the entire staff would turn over. That's pretty strong turnover. So
Yeah.
for recruitment, a lot of people are doing online recruiting and Zoom recruiting and everything else, and then try to do some onboarding when they come in, make, like Allison was saying, just help with the transportation, because they could fly to Anchorage and then they have to take another flight to the village. And with a family, that gets really expensive flying in and flying out. Some districts are helping with that. I don't know so much about like relocation expenses other than the flights, but the flights is a big one that people are getting. But the recruitment challenges is really just identifying people that want to take on the different scenario that you get living in a rural, very isolated community with a whole new culture. So that's the biggest recruitment challenge. And then of course now doing that virtually rather than having the big recruitment fairs that they used to have. I traveled to recruitment fairs in Michigan, Montana, Seattle, Portland to recruit teachers. So
Sarah, I have a question for the group when it comes to recruitment, the recruitment challenge. I'm wondering, and we don't know much about this in ed. I'm wondering if this hybrid model that was basically developed because of COVID-19 would help or be a more of a bigger challenge for the recruitment purpose, as far as what was mentioned in terms of the cost of moving and finding a place to live, whether or not going virtual, at least with part of teaching process, is going to be more helpful or more of a challenge. I'd like to get a sort of a broad kind of perspective on that to see how it may work or not.
Yeah.
So I can speak to that a little bit with my experience in just in the last month or so with one of the districts, rural districts, and they're having a hard time recruiting teachers for math, science. And so what they're talking about doing is doing one, and they have 3 different villages that they serve. So they're going to do one potential is to do one math teacher for all 3 villages and do it virtually and deliver the education virtually. And same with science. The issue is science can be hands-on. Math, having the teacher in the room is challenging for students, and we're talking about high school courses. So, the virtual is a neat idea, but it is, and having one based in one of the villages and serving all 3 of the villages from that one village virtually, having that hands-on help right there in the room for kids already struggling. It's not the best model, I don't believe. It's a good model to try, but ideally you have the kids in the room with you and you're supporting them that way.
Right.
But the situation is such that, districts are looking at that, and the kids are getting, they're not getting the same level of education that they would get with the teacher in a room. But it's something that people are looking at. I'm glad you brought that up, Charlotte, because it's going to impact, I think, negatively the outcomes for student learning. The way and the broadband and the lack of internet access in rural Alaska makes it's almost like you send packets to the kids and the kids do the packets and they send them back and the teacher grades them, and they can have phone conversations, but they can't have a meeting like what we're having right now effectively. As soon as 5 or 6 or 8 people get online in a school, the system goes down. Unless, hopefully that all changes. There's a lot of good things on the horizon when it comes to satellite Wi-Fi and other things that can change in a few years. But right now it's broadband is the biggest challenge to doing anything virtually.
I think Carl really expressed that well. And this is Allison from the Blue Lake Rancheria again. Under our demonstration grant, a major component was in-person instruction, hands-on learning experiences with our mobile maker technician. And COVID forced us to reevaluate how we could do that. And like Carl said, many portions of the reservations up here have no internet access at all. So while moving virtual can really work for those areas that have internet connectivity that's reliable, what we found, how we've been addressing it, is the teacher will record their session that they do, synchronous or asynchronous. They'll record it. And then we put them on these stick drives. So we've been buying a lot of stick drives. And then, like Carl was saying, you send a packet. So our hands-on learning, they get all the materials they need to build this robot or do this thing or whatever. And then they get a little jump drive that they can plug into their computer and watch the teacher teach the lesson, and they work along with it in real time. And there are other children in the lesson too, because she recorded it. So they get to see their other class members and things. And then what we're looking into, which you actually inspired us, was the Padlet idea of having a Padlet discussion board. But that's still, those kids that don't have the internet connectivity wouldn't be able to get that. So it's been difficult. I think it's doable if we are resilient and we think of ways to make it work. It is working for some of our students that did not feel comfortable attending school in person and were being bullied or experiencing extremely long commute times, 3-hour commute times a day to and from school. And we don't have to worry about that anymore because they're not having to commute on that bus. So they've been not as tired. When you get a kid that has to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to catch the bus to come to school, now they can just log on from home and they're bright-eyed and awake and they've had their breakfast. And so those kids, it's benefited them.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder, there's so many challenges in most of the communities that, all of us serve here on this call, as far as actually having fully online instruction due to internet availability and, device availability and a number of factors. But on the teacher end of it, do you feel like it's impacting your ability to recruit teachers, or probably more likely retain teachers because of the challenge, those additional challenges of trying to provide online instruction, in-person instruction, hybrid instruction, and kind of that wheel of options this year?
Yeah, so in one of the districts that I've worked with recently, and I brought up the math science issue, both the math teacher and the science teacher are both formerly retired teachers that came from another location to teach. And one of them had been there for 6 years, the other one 3 years. And basically what they've chosen to do this year is retire again. Even though they've only been there a few years, they call it retiring, but what they're doing is they're taking their sick leave and they're leaving the village. So they're not even, going to be providing math science for the last month, 6 weeks of the school year, and the district is letting them do that. So it's a little frustrating from my perspective that that's being allowed to happen. But if they can get a doctor's note that says they need to be out of the village, and it's hard for a district, human resources department to fight that. So it is causing, they don't feel like they're being effective. They don't have the kids in front of them. They're staying in a tiny little home. Their family's back in Wyoming or wherever. And they're just, So in the meantime, then the high school kids are just, not getting anything really for math science. And the kids need to graduate, but they're just going based off what work they turned in when they turned it in. It's really a tragedy. And it's a tragedy for education, what's happening out there.
Yeah, that's just so hard to work around, because it's not like you have this plethora of subs you can pop in to instruct for the rest of the year at all.
Well, I think our current technician, the teacher who's we call her the mobile maker technician. Our current teacher, she is enjoying it for now. She'd rather be in person, but she's making it work. But I think that if we decide to keep some virtual school, that we might be able to recruit more teachers that don't want to move up here and be so rural. Mm-hmm. Whether that means that the actual certified teacher is virtual and we have a para in a classroom, or Maybe we'd have to contract maybe with some graduate students to do like tutoring, side-by-side tutoring with the kids, but to
Yeah.
have a certified instructor teach the class. I don't know. I agree with Carl. I'd rather have the kids in person and have a teacher by their side, because math and science, you really need that right there next to you.
Yeah.
Um, I think we might be able to recruit teachers that are maybe not math and science teachers, maybe language arts teachers.
Mhm.
But I think it's going to be a challenge if we have to trying to get people up here is difficult.
A long-term solution that some districts are looking at is trying to promote teachers from the teacher aide positions and help pay for their college tuition or reimburse for college tuition, and try to move teachers from the ranks of the classified instructional aid positions into certified teacher positions. And that's something that's been going on in Alaska for 25 years. And there's been some success in that, but it's not been a ton of success in that, but there has been some. And so growing our own teachers, so we're not so reliant on recruiting from outside Alaska. It doesn't help that the largest, the School of Education for University of Alaska, that lost their accreditation last year. That didn't help at all.
No, that wouldn't help.
Oh, wow.
Well, what about for some of the others, Cameron or Laura? Have y'all seen any changes in the challenges around recruitment and retention of your teachers based on these additional online instruction challenges?
I'm in Alaska like Carl, and he is summing up everything perfectly. In one of our communities, we only have like 12 students. And so it's like, there's not a lot to offer people to come to a community that small to teach. And internet, a couple of our communities had to do packages the whole time that we were in lockdown and stuff. And that was, from my understanding, really frustrating to the parents and the students, because they were just mailing things back and forth and not getting instruction. So for us, we're trying to look at how do we deal with the broadband issue right now and stuff, and then try to go from there. I mean, we're like other school districts in Alaska are trying to grow our own, but that's a long-term solution and not something that's going to be solved within the next year or two.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and I want to make sure we also make some time to talk about the things that kind of have worked well. And I think we've touched upon a few of them as far as some strategies that have worked in particular for recruitment or retention. Are there any particular things that have been working lately for you or for the schools or districts that you work with in regards to recruitment or just trying to retain the teachers they do have? It sounds like to some extent, Carl, while it's definitely not an ideal solution to let the teachers just take sick leave and provide no instruction till the end of the year, it kind of sounds like it's the district's last ditch effort to just hold on to them for next year.
Yeah, I don't know if that's really their intent. It's just like they have no choice
Okay.
but to offer them that. And I don't think those teachers are planning on coming back. But that was a case earlier in the year earlier in the COVID pandemic, where it was evident there would be no in-person learning. The districts made the decision, and more than one district made the decision, to allow teachers to travel back to the lower 48 and work with their classroom instructional aides to provide services in the villages. And that was, I think, exactly what you're talking about, an attempt to keep them there. I think what districts are doing is, because they can't control the retirement, what they're doing is increasing the housing subsidy. So trying to increase, what teachers are receiving monetarily in other ways. Better insurance. I've seen that, increasing the benefits to insurance, lowering that cost of housing, adding money to, fly teachers in and out, at the beginning of and end of each semester, or at least at the beginning of each year and end of each year. So those sorts of things are, monetary. They're offering summer school though in one district, so I'm happy about that. And they're offering to pay teachers really well, and they're using COVID funds for that. So they're trying to set up some summer school programs where they can have face-to-face learning in the schools. So, and that gives teachers a way to make a little extra money in the summer, as well as helps the students. So that's good. I think one of the other things that districts have talked about doing in the past is bringing teachers in a week early and allowing them to have a nice long in-service, like in a urban hub like Anchorage. So that at the same time they can do their shopping, they can get prepared, load up their totes, and ship everything to the village. So just doing like an onboarding, induction type program for teachers as they come into the district to make them feel more at home, providing a mentor teacher, perhaps. Those are some of the other things that they're doing.
I can tell you that Blue Lake Rancheria, during our initial startup of our TEA, we looked into, what kind of teacher contracts and salary schedules and benefits were offered in surrounding areas and what would be considered average or normal, and then thought about, well, what makes working for us more desirable, and how could we make this better? And so I ended up asking a whole lot of different teachers what was their biggest gripe about the LEA they worked for. And one of them really went off and it was like, oh, let me tell you, and went to drive home to me that she felt completely unsupported. They could pay her all the money in the world, but she felt completely unsupported in the classroom with regards to keeping up her professional development, her career pace towards getting her master's degree, like them supporting her, growing her units, your BA, no hours, BA 10 hours, BA 20, so that she could move up the salary and step track. And so listening to that, I'm listening to other teachers talk about they had a lack of preparation time for their planning periods, and their planning periods always got interrupted, and they asked me to go sub for another teacher in a classroom when it was their planning period. So making those kinds of things sacrosanct for teachers, that they have a set aside planning period and a set aside professional development period, which that blows people's minds. What would the cost be? How could we do it? But we're exploring that. If that is an option we can get into, that would be having a teacher, instead of, you have 6 periods in a day, they teach 4 periods, they have 1 hour of PD, and they have 1 hour of planning time. And that way we have embedded professional development on a daily basis with a instructional resource coach that's there to help them, and then offer a certain amount of annual budget that to help them offset the cost of tuition towards moving up that step and track tree towards their master's. Some combination of that we're exploring, but the cost of it, that's another thing. The cost is tremendous, and it's like, oh boy, how can we do this? Because if that's what teachers are telling us, that they really want more planning time, more PD time, more classroom support, well then, okay, but how are we going to pay for that? I'm looking. That's what we're exploring right now.
Yeah, and I'll kind of throw in an example of one of the schools that I worked in when I was still in the classroom, we actually had not quite that full a model, but we did have it set up where we had we had a 7-period day, because I taught secondary, and you taught 5. You had 1 that was considered your duty period. So you were going to be getting, I used to say, lightly tricked into doing something, whether it was getting called in to help sub, or whether it was being assigned. Like I kept always getting assigned to in-school suspension, always a joy. And then the other period, that 7th period, wherever it fell in your schedule, was an off period, but it was an off period for your entire content area. So like I taught language arts. So all the language arts teachers had off that same period, and 4 days a week, yeah, it was your planning period for you to use as you needed. And then 1 day a week, it was used for team professional development. And so that was able to keep the cost a little bit lower just because it was built into the 1 day a week planning period. But it definitely drastically increased the amount of professional development that we were able to access. No, Lonnie, I think you had an idea. I saw your hand raised.
Yeah. I was, we actually, in the school I worked at, we actually went out for money and we broke them up into, our teachers up into grade bands. And so from grade band pre-K through 3, they had a whole day of planning, and we brought in cultural practitioners to instruct during that day for those students. And so we got a grant to pay for those practitioners to come in. And then our teachers had a whole day, which, in immersion and when you're trying to do culture-based, like there's no curriculum out there. So it gave them every week, they had a whole day of planning and professional development. The other thing is that you really have to be intentional about planning those days so that they're productive for teachers as well. But there is money out there to do that, and it's less expensive to pay the practitioners. Just an idea.
Yeah, no, and that's what we want to share ideas, because it's a challenge in so many communities. And kind of going back to what some of you were sharing about, you're asking folks to often move far from their family. And how do you make that attractive to? And I really liked the idea of giving them mentors. And I think that can be really helpful when you're in an area far from home, a new school, a new everything. Any other things that have worked well for any of you in regards to recruiting teachers into your schools or just retaining them once you've gotten them?
Just to piggyback what you had just said in terms of moving away, I can personally attest to that. I moved from Los Angeles up to Humboldt County, and having a mentor and walking through everything that needed to be done and going and having that kind of support really, really helps. And having the constant communication and feedback. So it can happen. I'm 1,100 miles away from home, so so it can happen. I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, kind of an idea on that topic. I have seen some schools that, particularly because they were recruiting heavily from areas outside of their area, so they had a large percentage of their teachers were non-native. And so not only were they moving into a rural area, but they were moving into a culture that they were unfamiliar with, that they actually pulled them in and provided a camp professional development setting, not just for the more instructional nature, but really just to provide them some instruction on the community and the culture that they were going to be working in and within, since many of them just had no idea. And I know that was really popular in this particular school district, as just making the staff feel more prepared and more engaged. Yeah, and Carl's saying they do something similar. Yeah. All right. And then I want to ask one more question before we kind of move on to the next thing. It sounds like there's definitely a particular need and challenge around getting and keeping math and science teachers. Is that pretty accurate? Are there other types of teachers that you find particularly challenging in regards to recruitment retention?
I would say yes. Believe it or not, technology teachers, people
Yeah.
in that's been interesting for us, trying to find people with the technical skills to be a technology teacher. That's been hard because they can make money so much more money elsewhere doing other things in technology. So they really have to want to be a teacher.
Yeah.
And that's been our big sticky point there.
And particularly right now.
Oh, yes, particularly right now. IT people had been in such demand. And because of the virus and everybody having to go virtual, I can't compete with the prices they're offering, the costs.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. And I know, Carl, you were throwing in not just math and science, but also special education.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're doing year-round recruiting for special education teachers, and then you have occupational therapists and speech therapists and all the kind of specialties that go along with it. Most districts in rural Alaska are contracting those services now. They can't hire people to fill those positions, so the service is much poorer as a result. The contractors get blizzarded out of their travel arrangements, or they get stuck in one village and can't serve the others, and they're flying up from the Minnesota and other places in the lower 48 to serve kids for OT, PT, psychological evaluations for admittance to special ed. And in some cases, special ed teachers are itinerant also, and trying to provide services is really pretty spotty.
Well, and I can vouch that, yeah, in the lower 48, that's happening a lot, particularly in rural areas as well, where it has gone to a lot of those special ed services being contracted out. I've seen where one group of therapists, diagnosticians, all those pieces are covering like a 7-county area, hundreds and hundreds of miles. So that's really challenging.
Yeah, my son is finishing up his senior year at Durango at Fort Lewis College, and we were talking about, what's your career, and he's looking at occupational therapists and physical. His girlfriend's doing the physical therapist thing, and it's like they won't have to worry about finding a job. He just needs to worry about getting into a master's degree program and finishing it, because the jobs will be there if he can do those things.
Absolutely, because there's such high demand and such low availability.
Yes, at Humboldt County, we have 31 school districts, and of the 31 school districts, only 3 have school psychologists. That's it. And those districts that have them, that school psychologist is the one psychologist for the entire district.
Oh yeah.
All of their schools in that district. Yeah, it's if anybody's looking for a career pathway, go in to become a school psychologist or a social worker, because it's very difficult to find people in those areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, that's all really helpful information. I want to make sure we have time to cover just a couple of last things, and then if we have time, kind of circling back. We're going to say professional development for May, because I want to make sure we have time to have a robust conversation around professional development as well. So stay tuned for the May one, and we'll get into that. And please, as you think of other topics that you want us to discuss or that you want to share ideas amongst your fellow grantees, let us know, and we're going to continue those conversations. I'm sure you are tired of hearing me say it, but we do have the project director meeting next week. I will say that all STEP grantees at least have one person registered for the meeting next week, which is fabulous. I'm going to be sending out an email later in the day, but y'all will get a sneak peek into the information that we do have a few extra seats available. So if you had registered the seats that you were allotted and you still had any people on your team who were interested in participating, but you didn't think you had any more spots for your grant, they are first come, first serve. So you can head on over to the website and register those additional people into those additional seats. So that will be next week. It will start on Tuesday at 1 Eastern. And every day, just to kind of give you a preview, will basically be laid out the same. Every day will start with a keynote for an hour, then a 15-minute break, then a breakout session where you'll have a choice of 4 different sessions going on, another 15-minute break, and then another breakout session with 4 options. You'll then have another 15-minute break, and then we'll have our hour-long networking session. So during the breakout sessions, they're going to be webinar style, where you're going to be able to watch and listen. You're going to be able to chat and do polls, but it won't be like this where you can see each other. In the networking, it will. In the networking, you'll be able to see everybody in your session. You'll be able to talk. And we're designing that as a more informal discussion Q&A type time. So you'll see there are 4 different discussion areas based on the sessions offered throughout the day that you can hop into those and actually have discussion and sharing during that final hour. And then on the very last day on Thursday, the final thing is that Julian Guerrero, the OIE director, will give us some wrap up thoughts to wrap our meeting. So just to kind of give you an overview of the day, I would suggest that if you have not logged into the website yet, go ahead and do that in advance. That way, if you have any trouble getting into the website, you have time now to let us know and troubleshoot that. Most people have been fine, but there have been a couple of hiccups. One thing to note in particular, if you use Internet Explorer, it doesn't cooperate. It just doesn't work on that. It will work with Microsoft Edge, Firefox, Safari, Chrome, any of those that will work with. It's just Internet Explorer because it's an older browser that it doesn't cooperate with. So log in, and that way you can also get a preview of all the different session options. The other thing that I wanted to just get your feedback on, so through the project director meeting, one piece of it that will happen is something called a social wall. And this is an opportunity for you to be able to share about your program, about the activities, about your staff, anything like that. And so it's going to be set up right there on the project director meeting website, but it's going to use Twitter. And so I'm curious, you can put in the chat box or you can use the voting buttons. How many of you actually have a Twitter? Let's see. So far, it looks like 1.
I don't use it. I mean,
2.
I think I've tweeted 13 times in 8 years or whatever.
That sounds like me. I have one. I don't use it for much, but it does exist. Okay, so it looks like about 2 of us. Looks like Allison and Laura have Twitter. So if anybody else, I missed you. Oh, and Carl.
Carl does.
Okay. So Allison, Laura, and Carl are tweeters. And it's not required that you have a Twitter, but I do want to just give you a heads up so that you don't get to the project director meeting and not know what's going on with that social wall. So the way that social wall works is that if you want to post something on it, you actually post to your Twitter and you hashtag. So our hashtag for the PD meeting is #OIE 2021. So if you put that hashtag in your Twitter post, it will magically show up on the social wall. So if you post a picture from your program or a link to your website or a thing that you learned during one of the sessions and you hashtag it, it will show up on that social wall. Also, the Office of Indian Ed now has a Twitter. It literally just launched the end of last week. But if you do happen to be someone who is interested in Twitter, you can find them at this OIE Indian Ed. That's their handle on Twitter. If you don't have Twitter, but this sounds fun to you and you would like to partake in that, I'll send out this link as well, and it will walk you right through how to set up your Twitter account. Is that something you'd like to do? Remember, you do have to follow, though, your social media policy for your organization. And so by that, I mean, you may or may not be able to set up an organization one. You may have to only do it personally, which means they may or may not be okay with you posting pictures as far as pictures of kids, pictures of staff from your program. So just make sure to check your social media policy. All right, and Laura, you found where to register, and perfect, okay. All right, and then I also wanted to make sure that everybody knew about the virtual tribal consultation that's coming up on the 26th. So you probably received a notification from Tribal Tech letting you know that this was going to be happening on Monday, the 26th from 1 to 4:15 Eastern. It's actually going to be 2 tribal consultations in one meeting. So from approximately 1 to 2:30 Eastern will be the tribal consultation for this grant program, the STEP discretionary grant program. Then there'll be a little 15-minute break. And then the second part will be a tribal consultation for the new funding stream for tribal education agencies that was authorized in the new American Rescue Plan. So that's your opportunity, anyone from your organization or your tribe, to be able to join on and provide that feedback. There is a registration link there. You'll be able to access that when I send out the slide deck. But like I said, you most likely also got this information through Tribal Tech. So if you just haven't read that email from them yet, that's in there, and it has a nice little button where you can click through to register. If you would like to submit written public comments, those have to be received by Monday, April 26th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. So basically before midnight on Monday, April 26th, and you can email that information to tribalconsultation@ed.gov. Any questions on the tribal consultation piece? And I know in the pre-show, it was also brought up, so if you were just kind of joining and hearing tidbits, that there is also a tribal consultation on April 19th, and that's actually a tribal consultation on how tribal consultations are conducted. So that is through a separate entity, but just something else that's kind of on the radar for a lot of folks. Additionally, we do have some other events coming up other than the project director meeting and tribal consultation. So we have our next talking circle for May, when we're going to get into professional development. That's going to be May 12th. We have our APR webinar, because you do have your STEP APR coming up in May. So I'm sorry, I sent out one and then we kind of immediately changed the date, but that is going to be Wednesday, May 5th at 3 Eastern. If you're not able to join live, know that we will record that. But if you are able to join live, that's always great, because you can get any questions answered right in the moment. We do still have our distance learning series going on. That will pick up right after the project director meeting. Still back on that every other Tuesday. We'll do virtual field trips on the 27th. And then in May, games and more, and increasing student engagement. And then wrap up the season with our virtual share fair. And then finally, we have our April office hours. That's that informal meeting that we do for an hour every month, where you can pop in and out, ask any questions. We typically have OIE staff in there as well as myself. So it's a great time to get feedback, ask questions, just discuss. And that'll be on April 29th, Thursday, April 29th from 1 to 2 Eastern. Any questions? And I'm going to pop up our end of event poll as we follow up any last questions.
Sarah, this isn't a question, but this is just a comment. And I want to say thank you for putting these videos up on YouTube, because sometimes I'm like, oh, what was that? What was going on? And I turn to YouTube, I go to the video, I see the slide, and I hear you talk about it. And it's helped me a great deal. So I really appreciate that format that's available.
Yeah, thank you. That's great feedback, actually, because it's always helpful to know if that's a useful way for people to be able to access the information afterwards. So thank you. And then, yes, I saw where Carl asked about the registration, and Laura was right on the spot and popped that right in the chat box. So thank you, Laura, for that. When you go in there, you can just fill it out, and then they should get an email. They say it could take up to 48 hours to get the email with your login, your link to log in. It typically, I think, takes about 6 to 8 hours before most people get it. But don't worry if it is tomorrow before they get that confirmation email. It's just the system trying to process it. All right. I think most folks have gotten to answer the poll. So I'll just finish up with our normal reminder of our contact information, both for Shala as well as for us at the TA team. You're always welcome to reach out with any questions and with any ideas you have for our upcoming talking circles. That's always welcome and helpful as well. And then I will send out this slide deck and the link to the recording just as soon as it has processed to the YouTube where Allison was talking about. You can view those recordings. So we are right at time. So y'all have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. And we'll see you, if nothing else, next week.
Thank you.